over there.
I'm Shay.
Jason.
We just started Loping Bears Farm in Ventress, Louisiana, and Moinkle Bear.
I'm Chris. I'm the farm manager at Crystal and Stamen, which is like a quarter mile that way on the same property. And it's sort of just getting built out.
Hi, I'm Olive, and I'm aspiring.
I'm Layla. I work at Sugar Ridge Farm, which is right here.
Hi, I'm Carl Matzenbacher, professor of sustainable agriculture at LSU.
Hey everybody, I'm Marcus. I'm with LSU.
I'm Kyle. I'm an apprentice here at River Queen Greens.
Christian. I'm also an apprentice at River Queen Greens.
I'm Chelsea, and I'm an apprentice here as well.
Well, I think we might have a couple other people joining. One person ended up in AMA.
Let's go.
There's GPSs. There's a lot of river roads around here.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like Maple.
There's just one river road, but it's many.
Yeah, every town on the river.
It's Michael.
has a river road. And here comes Michael.
Is that an easy mistake?
This river road.
Okay.
That's the name of the river road.
Michael.
And this is Michael.
Hey, I'm Michael. Sorry for being late.
What's up, Mike? That's alright. We're still waiting on at least one more, but we'll get started. Cool. So, pests and I want to just preface pests and disease by saying I don't know a whole lot about them. I like many farmers. I kind of learn as I need to, as they start to hear. I created a lot of homework for myself, which is a good thing. I kind of needed this time to go through and kind of identify things we've been seeing regularly. But these sheets that I handed out, up until yesterday, a lot of these things I was confusing or, not sure whether or not the two different names that apply to the same pests were actually two different pests or not. So I think the internet is very valuable when trying to identify pests. There are tons of different names for the same pest. There are also tons of slight variations in the different pests and diseases. And what I put on here is really just what we see commonly, or what I've seen commonly in other farms that I've worked at. Although those farms were in a completely different climate, but there's definitely some pest overlap and also some pests that we haven't seen, unfortunately, since moving back down here to the south. So, our basic strategy for pests is, I don't really mind them so much. I actually kind of like seeing pests. It means something is interested in what we're doing in the vegetables. If it was completely devoid of life, I'd be more concerned. It's really when there's an infestation that means something is out of balance and something needs to be corrected. Otherwise, I kind of ignore the pests. I'll pick them off when I see them, but we're always going to lose a little bit of our crop to pests or diseases or other environmental factors, and I kind of factor that in when we are crop planning. I'm not expecting that 100% of our crops will be perfect, so I'm not that aggressive in my pest management strategy. I try to avoid using even the organic sprays unless we really need to, unless we're having a real issue. I put on here on the top the top four. Actually, I should also say neem oil is a very common strategy. I've never personally used it. I've always used the pyrethrin-based pesticides, which is a neurotoxin derived from chrysanthemums. It's a very effective pesticide. It kills on contact for kind of the smaller, soft-bodied. We mostly use it for aphids, which is probably our biggest kind of year-round pest. But I find that they are often both cited as strategies for similar pests. So we've gone the pyrethrin route, but I do know a lot of growers that use neem oil and like it. Otherwise, our other most common pesticide that we use is BT, and that is super effective on caterpillars. They do have to ingest it before it works on them, so we try to only apply it if we're not going to be getting a rain for a couple of days, so it gives it time to, you know, be attractive enough for a pesticide. I brought out our kit over here. This is our pest kit. It's not a whole lot. Not very loud to begin with, so. Yeah, so if I were starting a farm, this is really all I would invest in for pests right off the bat. Oh yeah, one thing that I'm not showing is netting or row cover, which is all at our other farm site. But those are also very effective tools against certain pests. I haven't found the netting to be super effective, and there's some notes about that in here. The netting I have not found to be super effective against aphids, which, as I mentioned, is one of our most common pests. It is very effective against yellow margin leaf beetle, which has also been an issue for us in the past, and flea beetles, which was a really, really common pest for me up in New England, but I have not, knock on wood, fingers crossed, not seen much of here on our farm. But those were flea beetles, like the farm scene up outside of Boston right now, like in April, May, June, you'll just see acres and acres covered in row cover just for flea beetle protection. They're so infested up there. And it's because, you know, we're all growing the same things. We're all mostly growing brassicas, the kale, the collards, broccoli, turnips, radishes. Like 90% of what we grow is in that family, and flea beetles love it. But yes, fingers crossed they don't find us down here in any kind of long-term way. Yeah, so the 4-gallon backpack sprayer is very effective on our scale. You know, you can also get a tractor mounted sprayer. You can also get a 1-gallon pump sprayer for a smaller scale. But I found the backpack is pretty nice. It gives you a chance to kind of get up close with the plants. It takes probably like 40 minutes to empty the backpack. So, you know, you can kind of meditate on the pests and the plants. It's not the worst thing. I know some growers also really like to use foggers, which is just like a little heavier duty and gets more of a mist. I've never used it, but kind of intrigued by it. One of my favorite pest strategies is this Cowland clay. The Surround is the name brand, and it's in that ripped bag, and it's just a I'll show you. It's just a clay powder that we mix with water and we spray. If we're gonna have a dry spell and a particularly hot sunny one, it acts as a really great sunblock and also just a protective layer that discourages pests from wanting to lay their eggs and like spend a lot of time eating the plant. So this is just a really great all-purpose protectant. We use it a lot in the spring. We've been using it a lot in the fall too. I mix it right in the tank with this is our pyganic or pyrethrin, the chrysanthemum pesticide that I was mentioning before, and then this is our This is a granular it all in the tank. You can't mix everything in the tank. I would read the label and make sure it'll tell you what not to mix with, but we have mixed all 3 of our tools in the tank, which is great, so they do 1 pass.
Is the clay good for soft-bodied and like beetly things?
The clay is great just as a deterrent. It doesn't actually like kill anything, but so if we had like an infestation of worms, like we might use a mixture of the BT and the clay so that the BT would kill the worms and the clay would ideally prevent future interests. It's definitely not like the most effective. Certainly an actual killing pesticide would be more effective, but it's kind of like the strategies of putting like hot pepper or kind of like vinegar. So this is kind of like, you're gonna get a little look inside my brain, which is, still constantly learning. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, is this a disease? All diseases to me kind of look the same. They all create these like yellow, decaying, dying leaves. Some of them are a lot more severe and will permeate the whole plant. Some of them I feel like just kind of hang out on the outer leaves.
Did this show up after the storm?
This? No.
Yeah, the yellow.
The other thing is that we have had tons of aphids in these watermelon radishes, which is what this crop is. And so a lot of this damage, when I first saw it, I was like, that's probably aphids, because we started just clearing and topping everything because the leaves were infested. But I'm not seeing them now. They may have been blown off in a storm or gotten washed away in the storm, because I haven't seen as many since then. And we didn't spray these. We have sprayed other crops, but like, I'm not growing watermelon radishes for their green, so I don't really mind so much. They're all pretty mature at this point. They're kind of just hanging out in the soil. So I don't mind so much if their leaves start to get weird, as long as it doesn't affect the root. So when I saw aphids, it just meant we stopped bunching them and we started topping them. But this could also be some kind of leaf spot, which is a common like fungal disease that affects probably everything we grow. If you look at the disease sheet, the conditions that disease is like high humidity, wet conditions. So it's a miracle that fungus doesn't just take over the whole farm, because like this is kind of a nice dry spell, but even still our soil maintains pretty high level of moisture, so it feels dry to us, but our friends from other places still come here and think that right now it's super humid. So we live in a high humidity climate. It breeds disease. Our strategy is just like, I'm obsessed with pruning our plants. Like anytime we're harvesting something like kale, I'm always trying to take off any yellowing and dying leaves, just get them out of there, increase airflow, and let the plant focus on the healthy leaves and not try to save these leaves that are dying. So that's my number one strategy for disease. Like, I don't have any fungicides. We haven't yet started preventative spraying of fungicides, which I would consider that for tomatoes. I haven't had success growing tomatoes because of pests. Like they don't even get to a point where they can get a fungal disease because the pests get them first. So I'm waiting until we can put up, or we're getting some caterpillar tunnels this winter, and I'm waiting to put those up, and then maybe I'll try growing tomatoes again. Tomatoes is the one thing that I'm just like, I hate growing them. I like eating them fine, but I don't like them enough to really want to suffer through growing them here. They're hard enough to grow in the north, where they do eventually succumb to late blight pretty much every year at this point. But for a crop like this, like I'm not that concerned about this. I would be concerned if like every single plant had aphids. I was a little alarmed a couple weeks ago when we came through and we were harvesting, and I was starting to see real clusters, but I don't see them now. Did you find any, Kristen?
Just snails. They're on like those leaves.
Yeah, snails are everywhere too.
Snails eat aphids.
They don't eat aphids. You would think they should, right? Come on. Help us out a little. No, snails eat vegetables, not aphids. Yeah, snails is a common pest, but they're kind of everywhere all the time for us, but like not, you know, they're easy to find, but they're not like so destructive that I really care about them. Something like that you could deal with. You could use like a sluggo. I don't know if that actually works on snails. The best thing for snails is ducks, but I'm not going to bring a duck in here because, you know, safety. I would love to.
So
I love
cool.
ducks. But again, if you have an orchard and you have snail problem, get your ducks in there. So yeah, I feel like I don't really care about the watermelon radish. They're fine. We had aphids, but they seem to be gone.
When you do prune and you have like fungus and stuff, do you compost it or drop it on the ground, or you try to separate it? We haven't had any like super bad widespread fungal disease, so I'll just drop it on the ground or put it in our ditch. We have these drainage ditches at the ends of our beds, so that's where all of our plant matter goes right now. The compost that we add to these beds is not from things that we're making, so I don't get it that far away, but it doesn't go back in the bed unless I'm just dropping it, in which case it's in the pathway. Yeah, I could probably be better about being more careful when there is a fungal disease, but I'm kind of like, it's all just leaf spot, or, you know, I'm always like, it all just looks like these moderate kind of diseases that we just live with in this climate, and it's not until something is like really overtaken that I start to worry about like, okay, where am I putting this? But something like this I wouldn't worry about. Like, we'll just leave it in the pathway and then we'll tarp it once these beds are all clear. And you know, tarping has the effect also of cooking a lot of that. I don't know the particular science around like what temperature the tarps get to. It would be really interesting actually to kind of test that, like how hot does the soil get in the summer. I bet it gets pretty hot, and some of our friends who grow in Mississippi actually think that it gets too hot to kill off. So they're dealing more with like tarps for weed control, which we are too, but they're actually speculating if it gets too hot to kill the weeds, because they think it might actually just like go dormant, and because they were seeing flushes right after they pulled up the tarp. It's kind of interesting. But that's not science that I've really gotten into. Alright, well, I'm fine with the watermelon radish, so let's see what else we can find. I'm starting to get really concerned about these.
They like the Amara a lot.
Yes.
These are Harlequin stink bugs. Stink bugs can also be green, brown, tan, but they have this like shield-shaped body. We have a ton of these. Yeah, we just cleared some mustard greens that they really liked. And we can head that way and you'll see what they've been doing to them. They just take these little bites that just kind of like start to stress out the leaves, and they get real pockmarked. This is a really great example of stink bug damage. We just cleared this crop, which like I'm probably going to somewhat regret because it was kind of acting as a trap crop. But you can see like they just poke all of these holes, gets these kind of like dried up brown spots in the leaves. It ends up stressing the leaves very prematurely. They start to look like this, so we end up having to prune
Like Chelsea has been bunching these for our past few harvests and having to prune like half the plant off because they end up like this. You can use pyrethrin on them. I've never done that because like they fly, they bounce around, like they're kind of just hard to get in one place. So I don't want to have to come through and like be chasing it around with the backpack sprayer. They've never been that bad. Like even they were bad on this crop, but we still managed to get a harvest off of them. Just delete, you know, you kind of have to like be more aggressive when harvesting and get it before they kind of make it unmarketable. It wasn't like the most beautiful stuff, but after pruning it, it looked really nice still. And you know, you're gonna cook it and eat it. You're not gonna look at it. So I'm not that like I like to sell really nice vegetables, but I'm not trying to give a false illusion either that our vegetables are gonna be really uniform and perfect. Like I want our customers to understand the kind of challenges we face here in South Louisiana. So I'm fine with holes in our greens as long as it's not like half the green is full of holes. People also tend to like, they're like, oh, that's really known for organic. So yeah. Yeah, so these like, I don't know what I would really like is to have some chickens over in the next pasture where I could just come through with a bucket or like have like a little side pouch attached to my belt or something. Anytime I see one, just put them in there, close the lid, and then go over and dump them in the chicken area, and the chickens will have a little snack. But we don't have animals here quite yet, so
We bring them to our chicken.
yeah, we'll bring them to Sugar's chickens. So if you have any volunteers that want to come pick chicken snacks, it's a great activity for kids.
Yeah.
Like you know, I've definitely spent a lot of time with volunteer groups picking like Colorado potato beetles off of potatoes. Like these kinds of really beautiful, kind of like easy to spot pests can be a really fun group activity. So don't underestimate it.
I have a question.
Yep.
What is your? I know you said you were thinking that you should have left this as a trap crop. Do you guys have any kind of like systematic practice with like trap crops or beneficials, or like what is the balance? I've been thinking a lot on our farm. What is the balance between like leaving habitat for beneficial insects, but sometimes that habitat is also hosting your pests, and like how do you figure that out?
That's a great question and something we are also considering. So I've never intentionally planted a trap crop because we've never had a ton of space. Like we're getting more and more space here as we build out, so now would be a time to start thinking about that. But I've never wanted to sacrifice, like intentionally go in and be like, okay, I'm not going to harvest this bed. I'm just going to try and funnel all of my beetles to it or something. And I don't know how effective it is. Dr. A actually, he's a good person to ask about trap crops. He has a lot of opinions about them and specific varieties for specific crops, which is interesting. I think if you're going to do it, you really want to research like what's going to be the most attractive. Or just observe. Like now I feel like, okay, Amara, that's this variety of mustard green. Like this is gonna be a really attractive trap crop to stink bugs. So we could, you know, plant it. I've seen people say like you want to plant it like every 7th bed or something if you have like a half acre. But it's like, what does that translate to if you just have like 3 beds? Is it like, could I just put like 1 plant every 10 feet or something? Yeah. So there's some like calculating to do to try to really use the knowledge that's out there to your advantage. Because if it doesn't work, then you're just attracting pests that are just gonna like spill over the rest of your crops. Yeah.
Kind of like piggyback off what you just said. Could you kind of like plant trap crops in like an in bed, like kind of like an end cap? Like you'd have a whole bed, but say this ditch wasn't here, right? If you did like a little half bed at the end, could you plant trap crops there?
Yes, I think that's a better strategy for, like, that's what I'm more attracted to, and not necessarily a trap crop, but to kind of go back to what you were saying, Layla. I think having pollinator habitat is probably like one of the most important pest management strategies, because it attracts such a diversity of pollinators, and a lot of these pesticides are not toxic to pollinators. I would double check. I know like BT is not. Hyganic I think is if you hit a pollinator, so just but it's on contact, so like you kind of just have to be strategic around your management strategy. And if you like, the idea of a trap crop is like you gather them all in one place and then you still do kill them. So it's not just like that they hang out on that trap crop forever, because then you're just like growing their population. But I think if we had a pollinator habitat and I found that it was getting kind of infested, I would probably go through with an organic pesticide just to try to like knock back that population and try to encourage the flourishing of the predators. Something that a lot of gardeners and growers will do is and we've done this in the past too, is you can buy predators, you can buy ladybugs, you can buy lacewings, but
Parasitic wasps.
you can buy, can you buy parasitic wasps? Probably, you can buy
We buy
anything.
for the hookahs.
Yeah, oh yeah, we did buy parasitic wasps. But the thing is, like, predators, especially ladybugs, like, they're so, like, endemic to their, like, native space, so I find that buying ladybugs has not actually ever worked out because they just leave. They're like, this isn't their home.
And don't they like collect them in like the mountains on the west coast somewhere and like ship them to you? I always thought that was so funny.
Yeah, they definitely, they collect them where they're prolific, and then they get here and they're like, no. I wasn't raised here, I'm not familiar with this climate, so I feel like we've gotten, like thousands of ladybugs, and after like a day, I see like half a dozen eating aphids, and it's just like, this ratio is not working out, so I think the best thing that you can do is attract your own ladybugs, and that is by being really intentional about pollinator habitat. And also, one thing about habitat, like, we don't have a ton of rodent or like small mammal pests, fortunately, but part of that could be because we have really great snake habitat here, and we also have hawks and kind of a lot of aerial activity. But there's a lot to be said for like leaving some of your field edges overgrown and kind of like letting that native habitat just be a great cover for some of these predators, because like I'm obsessed with mowing. I love mowing. I love a clean border, but I also that works in tension with my understanding that like habitat and overgrowth, it can be a really good thing too. So I think just kind of keeping that in mind as you plan your fields, like you don't want to strip it of all life, like we want the balance, we want the life in there. We don't want to just like, I don't want super bare soil with no life in it, because our plants need that life to thrive also.
Cheryl, do you have some favorites, like in terms of plants that you would put that would attract pollinators and kind of be like beneficial support?
Any native flowering plant is great. If you're going to be doing if you're going to be cover cropping at the same time that you're growing stuff, if you're cover cropping a certain area, like buckwheat does really well here for most of the year. Like it grows really fast and it flowers, and you'll probably see some scattered around our fields that's left over from summer. Buckwheat is just like a really great attractor of bees and other pollinators, like marigolds, calendula. Phacelia is a flower that I've seen come up a lot as a really great pollinator and like predator attractor. So any of those, like, if you're trying to really specifically attract certain predators, like ladybugs or lacewings or some beetles, then I would just look up like zone 9, which is our zone, like, you know, what's like the most attractive thing for these insects here. But really anything flowering.
There's also there's a nice nursery called Delta Flora, and they do like all native plants. And they might know like more pollinator specific stuff, and it's also just like a really cool local business to support.
Where are they located?
Where is their nursery again? It's on like Cheryl.
They're in like the 7th ward.
Yeah.
It's close to the Lowe's, off of the Legion. in
Delta
Central-
Flora?
Central Lawrence, but they have weird hours, so look it up.
Yeah. I saw they were selling at the refresh market. Whole Foods, or not at Whole Foods, around the corner from Whole Foods.
Hey Cheryl, is the white fabric just about heat, or does it have anything to do with pests?
The white fabric, because these 4 beds of landscape fabric, ignore the baby kales and the collards coming up, because those are replacement crops for what was initially planted here, which was 4 beds of Swiss chard, which got immediately attacked by armyworms. And you can see what armyworms do. They totally skeletonize the plant. They leave a disgusting mess. And they do it really quickly. They really do come in like a little army and annihilate everything in sight.
Our Swiss chard didn't even make it out of the greenhouse. They ate it
Really?
as a transplant.
So we've been farming here now for 3 years, and every fall I try to grow Swiss chard and beets, and I don't know why I keep trying to, because the armyworms love that family of crops this time of year. And I think we just planted another round in our new field over there, and I immediately had Kyle go and spray Surround and BT on it as a preventative spray, which I don't usually do, knowing that they'll probably find it soon. And fingers crossed, it still looks okay. But that's the 3rd planting of Swiss chard we've done this fall. The 2nd planting, we filled in the holes here, and I also sprayed it, but not right away. And all these empty holes, that's the result of our 2nd planting. And
We didn't have to clear up.
we didn't have to clear them. They create, like, now it's ready to plant again. So I don't know what I'm going to put in here. Probably more kale, because they don't love, like, they really just love this family this time of year. I mean, the armyworms come in many shapes and sizes. I put a few examples on here, but they have like 10 different names, like beet armyworms, African armyworms, fall armyworms, cabbage reapers, which are more attractive to the cabbage. But in the fall, the armyworms are one of our biggest pests. They've also done this to the beets. Luckily, we got some beets out of them, and like beets again is something we can just top. But we still need those leaves for the plant to photosynthesize. So it's like, if we can get the beets to grow before they find it, then fine, we lose the greens, which is sad, but not the end of the world. But a lot of times they'll get there before the plant has really formed. And so that's just a total crop loss. So I don't know if we just didn't plant these, would they attack something else in another family? I don't really know, because I'm just like, forget each year that we shouldn't plant them. But maybe it's okay, because it's just a trap crop that I was not intending to have. So in the spring, the armyworms also, they love tomatoes and will cover the tomato fruit, the plant, everything. They're just disgusting. I mean, it's one of just many things that love tomatoes. But yeah, there's I don't know, I guess some stuff is coming back here. I haven't seen lots of evidence of them. They don't seem to like the cold weather as much. So So we can, I think next year I'll probably wait until October to plant my chard. The first round of chard went in August. The second round went in September. The third round went in October. And we'll see if the third round makes it.
Hey Cheryl,
Yeah.
have you ever had success, like essentially hiding a small part of a crop away from the rest of that crop? We've done it on a really small scale because we've typically grown on a really small scale where like if we have like 15 feet of snapdragons and move it away from the rest of the snapdragons, they'll be less likely to get the same pests that are like the area of all of them. But I'm wondering, I don't know if it works on a larger scale.
We haven't really done that intentionally, but sometimes we'll have like 2 beds planted and they're on opposite sides, and it does work. I mean, that is a strategy that a lot of growers use. Like you can just put in a buffer. So that kind of also ties into like the kind of like every 7th bed you put in pollinator habitat, but you could also just not plant everything in the same family together and have a system that is more conducive to that. Like we certainly could do that and probably see different results. Like we've had a couple of peat plantings going at a time, and you know they'll start with one and then we'll go to the next one. But they definitely, you know, they're very thorough, so they'll focus all their attention on one spot. That is a good strategy, I think, if you can kind of work it into the way that you grow. Some of these kales look like they're getting attacked by pests, but this is actually just hurricane threaded. So a lot of our, like we were really lucky and didn't have a lot of damage, but we did have a lot of kind of like minor shredding of leaves, which is just going to result in us having to come through a prune as they start to wilt and die off. But the plants themselves overall survived, and we're pretty happy with that. Definitely could have been a lot worse. Alright, so armyworms, I'm not seeing the worms themselves, but you don't always see them. Sometimes they just come through and leave a path.
But I guess you're probably protected from this through just like diversity and like the size of everything that you have going on. But when you have just wholesale destruction of a particular crop like this, like how big of a hit is that on the farm as a whole? Like, I mean, are y'all having to how many weeks did
prevent the armyworms like at the adult stage? And the way that they get here, the moths come at night and they lay eggs in the soil. And you can, I'm skeptical that netting works. I've heard some other growers around here that netting doesn't really work. Maybe if you can be like really, really on it and have your net going like even before you plant your crop maybe. But I just feel like it's like already too late by the time we get our crop in. And if they want to eat it and they want to get in there, they're going to. But that's my kind of view of armyworms. Maybe realistic.
One more question. Could you put the DE in the soil, like in a bed you knew you were going to transplant something that armyworms like? Could you put the DE in the soil, or would that be something that would be?
Maybe. I've never heard of that, but you could maybe do that. You mean like for the moths, or for like when they lay the eggs and the eggs kind of come out into this?
For when they lay the eggs. So.
I don't know.
If you want to like top dress like a bed, kind of.
Top dress it before you transplant it with DE, then cover it. Maybe. You should try that and let us know.
I'll let you know. Give me
You have a new project.
Give me about a year. You know?
Yeah. What else we can find? Similar to the watermelon radish, but these I don't think had aphids, or I haven't seen them. It's very possible they've been in here. But our friend Margie, who's also a farmer and a very knowledgeable grower, thought that it was whitefly damage. It's like you can see if we're we're hitting it that there are some kind of bugs jumping up. So it's very possible that it's whitefly.
Kyle can do whatever.
I haven't seen
You were standing.
the actual whiteflies themselves. So it could just be kind of like sporadic whitefly over time because, again, I haven't been paying that close attention to this bed. It's daikon radish, so I'm growing it for the roots again. So I'm not obsessing over the greens as much as I do other crops. But if it is whitefly, like this damage is consistent with that, but this damage could be the result of other things as well. But whiteflies kind of like come in and suck out the juice, and so you end up with these like dehydrated leaves that start to like crumble and wilt and die. And theoretically, if left long enough, like it could affect the whole plant, could potentially end up rotting the whole plant. But I've never personally had whitefly damage to the extent that it actually affected, like in a root crop, that it actually affected the root. So I'm not that concerned about them. They're similar to something I used to see a lot in the north, which was leafhopper, which is just a very similar, like invisible pest that you don't see until you hit it, and then you see this whole cloud of pests jump up. And they also just like dehydrate the plant, and they actually I have found those to be much more destructive. Like they could destroy a whole potato crop because you kind of don't see them coming, but there are so many of them, and then like overnight they just like crisp up and brown the whole plant. And a lot of times that happens early in the life cycle of the potato, so a lot of times it's hard for the plants to bounce back and photosynthesize again. But like I'm not that concerned. Similar to the watermelon radish, it's kind of in the same category for me, where it's like if this is about all they're doing, I'm fine with that. I'm happy to leave them be.
In your career, have you had any issue with like white powdery mildew or black spots and things like that?
I mean, I've definitely had those be very present, but I've never had seasons. I mean, we've had weather seasons where like it was more of an issue. It really affected our cucumber and squash planting.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very susceptible. Yeah, so there's some info about that on the disease chart, and that's a really common disease, fungal disease that hits the cucurbit family, and it's kind of like I've mostly seen it towards the end of the life cycle of the plant. It's harder on those longer winter squash plants because they're in the ground so much longer. But for us, what we were mostly growing was summer squash and cucumbers, which are much faster, and we would just grow successions of them, knowing that eventually they would probably succumb to one of the mildews, which just kind of browns and wilts the whole plant, and the fruit production totally stops or starts to rot. So it's kind of something like I kind of have understood as I've learned about farming that eventually your plant is gonna get like you're kind of just in a race with either the disease or the pest or just the weather. So if you want a consistent supply, you gotta like do a lot of successions and just a lot of plantings and kind of just stack your skills higher than theirs to get enough of the return that you want. But I feel like everything ultimately gets, in these wet climates, like everything ultimately gets a disease, if not eaten by a pest first, if it's left too long.
Do you know anything that helps? Because I usually use like copper fungicide, but I just want to think anything else.
Yeah, copper is good. What else is on here? It's harder, yeah. So like I was reading something. Someone said apple cider vinegar is good. Yeah, Chris.
For really high value crops, we use potassium bicarbonate, which is an organic chemical that you can buy it organic and non-organic, but the organic one is very expensive. It's called green cure, CURE. And we use it on really high value flower crops to just slow down how quickly the powdery mildew will kill them.
can't really stop it once it's pretty much like taking its home with me.
No. Yeah, it's gone. It's really bad in our basil actually. And we can like prune it and hope that we get a dry spell so that the new growth retakes over. But if we have continued to have wet, humid weather, it just spreads it around itself. And so we've been losing a lot of basil crops to downy mildew. But yeah, it starts as like that yellow and kind of like the brown underneath. But you can, for basil, that the reason it's been so bad for us this year is because we're using old seed that was not actually disease resistant. So I would look, if you're buying seed, like it's always worth checking its disease resistance. A lot of breeding has been focusing on fungal disease, so you can find a lot of varieties that are more resistant, and we have grown better basil with more resistant seed. And I'm always kind of skeptical about like the gizmos on seeds, but it's good to see for myself that it does actually work. Yeah, Chris.
You mentioned this about other things, but another strategy that's really helpful for mildews and type of fungus is just spacing between their fruit bar. Because so much of that seems to be propagated if when plants stay wet for too long or something. So just making that they have less cohesiveness over. And we discovered that again by accident, sort of just by like having some crops where their each of them died because the spacing was really wide, and observing that they lasted a few more weeks than
Yeah, it's hugely important here in our just airflow in general. All right, what other pests do we have here? I don't know if we're gonna have a whole lot. Got a cucumber beetle eating our cabbage leaf.
On a minute,
Confused again. I don't know where it went. Got a shame, but this little fresh bite here. Cucumber beetle damage. I know I did worry about cucumber beetles and cabbage.
But they usually don't like things like this, right?
It's not their preferred diet, but I guess they'll eat it if they're out hanging out. So yeah, we can look around here. Right.
One of those assholes would come up with something like this, start talking
Yeah,
about
so
it.
usually when I see something like that, I'll kind of look around, see if I can find out what it is.
Just sizing it.
But when I don't see any evidence, probably it's when it moves on quickly, like that. Me too. Yeah, this. Get it really.
The buckwheat, how hard is that to sow?
To sow?
Yeah.
We just broadcast it.
That's what I said. Well, broadcast and launch it. Twice a day. That's what I figured.
We before we left for the summer, we knew we had like a couple of rainy days on the horizon, so we just came through and we just broadcasted it. We actually have a little like shoulder bag spreader, and we didn't cover it at all. We just let the rain kind of because we know that the soil surface stays really wet, especially in summer when we get those afternoon storms, and we knew it would be wet enough to germinate it. And we came back and it was fine. Yeah.
I like cooking plants.
If you can like, you can also seed it. You can seed it like an earthway seeder has plates that are big enough. And we did that on our other lot in the city, which has sandier soil.
Right.
But the earthway would be really tough to get through our heavy clay here. I would spray BT for these. If we find that before the cabbage is heading up, they're becoming a real issue. I don't mind a couple of plants having them, but I don't want all of our cabbage, all of our customers to open up their cabbage and find little worm surprise. Yeah, you can. I think it requires. So yeah, you can certainly use the clay to like if you have a tray that you're about to transplant, you can create a clay mixture and dunk the whole thing, but it requires more water and I think a heavier concentration of clay to get it to stick to that. So it's really just kind of a preference. Like for us, we'll sometimes just spray the clay, but oftentimes we're spraying the clay in conjunction with something else. At least this fall it's been clay and the Pyganic or BT or both. As the spring heats up into summer, that's more when we are spraying the clay more just for like the sun protection if we're getting a lot of just like really blazing hot days. I don't know, I'm kind of mixed on whether I like to dunk the tray or spray. The spray is just like more direct, but the dunk is a lot more efficient if you can get that good contact with the clay.
The clay does not have the same kind of method of operation as like diatomaceous earth, right? It's not really the same.
You mean like if it rains and...
Or like just sort of like how it's effective. I mean, it's like a deterrent, but it's not killing them, right?
Yeah.
Diatomaceous earth is a killing substance?
DE does kill something, like some really soft body things because it's so like spiky, you know? But I think it also acts as a deterrent. It's like walking on broken glass for a lot of insects, like right around the plant base.
Okay.
So it kind of depends on the insect. The clay will not kill anything. So DE I think will kill some of those like smaller, softer bodies.
To your point, do they wash away in the rain?
But they both wash away in the rain. Yeah. I mean the residue of the clay, like even after a rain, will stick a little bit, but it's not harmful to humans. So you know, and it does keep diluting with water. Yeah, Christian.
With the BT being a bacteria that lives in like the soil, does it have to be like sprayed on it, or can you just put it in the soil?
Well, you can put it in the soil. It kind of depends what pest you're trying to get at. If you're aiming for a pest that's really like eating your leaves, then you want to spray it on the leaves so that the worm will actually ingest it. But there are like cutworms is a common pest that just kind of eats through the stem of the plant right below the soil surface. So in that case, putting it right around the plant at the soil could be very effective. I've never personally done that with cutworms because an alternate cutworm strategy is just to put a solo cup around the plant, which is a physical collar, and that's actually very effective. And I've mostly had cutworm issues with plants that are bigger, like tomatoes or peppers, things that there aren't that many plants, so it's not that difficult to place a barrier around each of them, rather than spreading the powder around each plant.
Is there any negative like effects of like if you were to do that, like put the BT like in the soil? I mean, it's already probably like in the soil, so I guess.
I don't think so. I mean, it's it also, kind of washes away and then leaves in the rain. I think it's not in the soil in such a concentration that is effective for just in a natural state. So I think like having this concentrated amount that you target to where that pest is actually munching on, I think that's what makes it a really effective pesticide. So the last thing I'll say before we start walking around is I included the phone number of Dr. Ayanava Majumdar from Auburn University. I attended a presentation he did at the conference where he just said to text him a photo of any pest damage you have and he'll text you back a recommendation and an identification for what it is and what to do. So I've used him a lot to kind of like parse out between two pests that I was suspecting, or to ask him like, is it okay to mix these things in a tank? He's super responsive. He usually responds within a couple hours. He doesn't care who you are. Just say like where you're coming, what zone you're in. So I'll be like, hey, it's Cheryl from New Orleans. Is this yellow margin leaf beetle, or is it flea beetle, or is it grasshopper? What do you think? And what do we do? So that's been really fun. He's very knowledgeable. He's an entomologist.
Dr. Matsubaker was saying that you might be able to get him to come.
Yeah, he actually was here. We did a training about 2 years ago. He came over and did a day-long training, and he has those cards. He has a push card that has all that information. It's really a handy guide for out in the field. Remember we had those last year?
We have one of those on our that I mentioned. It's on our website.
He gives those out too. He has funding for that. So we can see if we can try to bring him here, but also have him bring those cards to give out to people because they're really useful.
Yeah, those cards, it's like probably has most of what I have on here, if not everything. And it's probably more general info, which is good for multiple applications. Yeah, he's a great resource if you do get him down here.
And he's also doing work on shading to exclude insects in high tones.
Yes.
Which is really very top notch work.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody else that's doing this.
Yeah, I didn't even want to go into that because that's a whole other ball game. But managing pests in your high tunnels, especially on things like tomatoes, which is often why people get up in the middle. Okay, so I thought we could just walk around and kind of look to see if we can find some pests. I bet we can. Or just identify things that look weird or wrong with our plants, and maybe we can figure out what it is. Yeah. It was an experiment about heat. It didn't really work because you can see in some of these parts of the bed it doesn't actually kill the weeds underneath. Like in the spring, it was actually like a grass and just underneath. Like it's kind of just, it's just like a greenhouse. It lets the light through too much and the water, of course. So we had a lot of issues in the past when transplanting in hot weather. If the rain comes and obscures your transplant to the fabric, and then the sun comes out, and then you just fry up your plants. But I don't recommend the white.
You don't recommend the white?
I don't recommend the white. Unless you have other ways of preventing weeds growing under it. It just wasn't if it was black underneath, that might be better, to kind of trap that heat under there to really keep the weeds at bay. But it just, the grass just kind of went crazy underneath it.
Was it kind of miserable to work
He's fussing.
on the white stuff because it's so bright in your face? You just get roasted.
Do you reuse the farm where they had?
Yeah, you can reuse
and I was just like,
fabric is reusable. Kind of indefinitely as long as it doesn't get churned up. But it's great. I love the landscape fabric because it's permeable, does let the water through, and it becomes reusable. And we just
This is a weird, different, more plasticky material too. I don't know if does it make it less permeable? you burn
Yeah,
it,
it is. It's like a
melts
light,
very differently. It's
more
Is it just a
lighter.
thicker grade?
I think it's thinner
It's a
actually.
different.
It's a
like
different.
Feels like there's a
Yeah.
plastic content
Different
to it.
plastic.
It's like plastic instead of more like cloth.
Cute.
There's actually more
Okay.
tarp material that you would.
You can take them home if you want.
That's softer.
They're so pretty. These
They are hard.
It feels like
I
Yeah,
know.
it's like,
That's. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about all these pests. Like,
Yeah.
so many of them are
Yeah,
so
fibrous.
beautiful.
I don't feel that way about the army worms.
when you burn it,
Oh, no,
it
the
looks
army
like
worms are
melted
fresh.
marshmallows.
Yeah,
It's like
these little.
perceptive.
I see these little globs of it still
Speaking of
clinging
army
on there.
worms, let's go check out some army worms, Dad.